are hieroglyphs that archaeologists that he was in, that was the mission. What he has seen with his own eyes, 2 miles down under ice.
Imagine standing at the edge of the world. No city lights, no roads, no signal on your phone. Just endless white stretching in every direction. A wind so brutal it can freeze exposed skin in under a minute, and a silence so deep it almost feels alive. That's Antarctica. And for most of human history, we left it alone. We had to. It wasn't just remote, it was hostile. A frozen wall at the bottom of the planet that seemed to say, in no uncertain terms, "You are not welcome here." But here's what gets me. The more we learn about Antarctica, the more we realize that empty might be the single most misleading word ever used to describe it. Because according to a small but growing group of military insiders, scientists, and government contractors, people who signed non-disclosure agreements and spent decades keeping secrets, Antarctica is hiding something extraordinary, something massive, something ancient, something that, if true, completely rewrites everything we thought we knew about human history. And one woman has spent over 25 years trying to bring that story to the surface. Her name is Linda Moulton Howe. Let's start with a little geography, because the scale of this place actually matters. Antarctica is bigger than the United States and Mexico combined. It holds roughly 70% of the world's fresh water, all of it locked in ice that in some places stretches more than 2 miles straight down. The average temperature hovers around -57 degrees Celsius. Some spots have gone colder than any temperature ever recorded on Earth. And yet, beneath all of that ice, we genuinely don't know what's down there. We can scan it. We can send radar pulses through it. We can drill into it. But even today, in the age of satellites and supercomputers, the deep interior of Antarctica remains one of the least understood places on the planet. So when Linda Moulton Howe, an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist with a track record of carefully documented, thoroughly verified reporting, says that credible witnesses told her something unbelievable is buried under that ice, I think that deserves a real conversation. The story begins not with a headline, but with a phone call, and it starts decades before anyone was ready to listen. Cast your mind back to 1982. It's the height of the Cold War. The US military is operating in Antarctica as part of a network of logistical support missions, running supplies and equipment to remote research stations across the continent. One of those missions involved a US Navy flight engineer. His job was routine. Hop on a transport aircraft, fly from McMurdo Station to a distant research camp, deliver supplies, head home. Standard stuff. He'd done it plenty of times before, but on this particular flight, something went wrong. A mechanical issue forced the aircraft to make an emergency landing on a ridge far from any station. Not ideal. Antarctic ridges are dangerous, exposed, and absolutely unforgiving. The crew scrambled to fix the problem. Temperatures plunged. Every second outside the aircraft carried real risk. While the rest of the crew worked on the plane, the flight engineer found himself with a few spare moments. He looked out across the ridge, and that's when he saw it. In the distance, half buried under wind-swept ice, were shapes that didn't belong. Clean lines, sharp angles, perfect geometric symmetry. Now, if you've spent any time around ice and rock formations, you know something important. Nature doesn't do straight edges. Wind and water and time create curves, jagged peaks, random patterns. They don't build walls. They don't create what looked, by every description this man would later give, like the exposed corner of a massive, deliberately constructed structure. He started walking toward it. The surface he could see wasn't rock, it wasn't ice. It looked like something altogether different, something solid and shaped by intelligence, not geology. And then his radio crackled. Orders came through. Get back to the aircraft, now. He obeyed. They left. But what happened when they landed is honestly the part that stuck with me most. Because when that plane touched down, there were people waiting. Intelligence officers. They separated every crew member, took them into individual rooms, and questioned them one by one. The flight logs were confiscated and stamped classified. Non-disclosure agreements appeared on the table, and the message was delivered with total clarity. This never happened. The flight engineer signed. He went home. He kept his mouth shut for nearly 20 years. Then, in 1998, in his 70s, and knowing that time was running short, he decided that some things shouldn't go to the grave with him. He reached out to Linda Moulton Howe. He told her everything: the route, the landing, the structure, the debriefing, all of it. She checked his service records. She verified his background. Everything lined up. She believed him, but she also knew one witness wasn't enough. So she waited. Here's where this story gets genuinely strange. Because over the next 20 years, Linda didn't go looking for more witnesses. They came to her. One by one, people from completely different walks of life, different branches of the military, different scientific fields, different nationalities, began reaching out. None of them knew each other. None of them had compared notes. And yet, again and again, their stories pointed toward the same thing. A geophysicist who had worked on ice-penetrating radar surveys in Antarctica told Linda about data that stopped him cold. During a routine mission, his equipment picked up anomalies deep beneath the ice, not cracks or natural voids, but large, organized, empty spaces. Symmetrical, regular. The kind of geometry you associate with buildings, not geology. He reported the readings to his supervisor. Within hours, the data was classified. His team was reassigned. Nobody was allowed to discuss what they'd found. Then there was a witness from a U.S. Navy construction battalion. His team was dispatched to a remote location, far from any research station, given almost no explanation, and given one instruction: drill straight down. When they reached the bottom of the shaft, he saw walls that were metallic and smooth, too perfect to be natural. He told Linda he stood there, feeling something he couldn't explain, a deep, cold certainty that he was looking at something that had been built. A scientist working at Argentina's Esperanza base described pulling objects from ancient ice cores, objects that were clearly not natural, only to watch military personnel appear almost immediately and remove every sample without leaving a single record behind. No reports, no catalog entries, nothing. A military pilot recalled flying over a restricted zone that appeared on no official maps. When he asked what was there, his superior shut the conversation down in 2 words: sensitive research. Linda laid all of these accounts side by side. Different people, different years, different parts of Antarctica. And yet the testimony kept converging on the same conclusion. Something large, something structured, and something ancient was buried under the ice. If the earlier witnesses lit the fuse, then the testimony Linda received in 2016 was the explosion. The source was a retired NORAD officer, someone who had spent his career working at the highest levels of classified military intelligence. Linda would later describe him as the most credible source she had ever interviewed in decades of investigative work. That's a significant thing for someone like her to say. He told her that beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 miles down, there are structures that cannot be explained by any natural process. Not rock formations, not ice anomalies. Structures, designed, built, and deliberately shaped. And then he told her something that changed the entire framework of the conversation. These structures are older than the ice above them. Think about what that means for a second. The ice sheet covering Antarctica built up over thousands of years. For something to be beneath that ice, buried under layers that took millennia to form, it would have to predate those layers. That puts its origin at more than 12,000 years ago, which is before the last ice age, which means, and this is the part that tends to make historians uncomfortable, that when these structures were built, Antarctica was not frozen. Scientific evidence, including ancient maps and ice core data, suggests that Antarctica was once a temperate landmass, green, with rivers and coastlines and a climate that could have supported life. Whatever built those structures did so when Antarctica looked nothing like it does today. The NORAD officer went further. He said the first official detection of these anomalies happened during Operation High Jump, the famous 1946 to 1947 Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. The public version of that mission was framed as a training exercise and scientific survey. But according to this source, seismic data collected during High Jump picked up underground signals that matched no known geological structure. That data was quietly classified. Over the following 70 years, the officer explained, multiple nations quietly returned. The United States, Russia, later China. And these weren't research trips in the traditional sense. They were described, internally, as recovery operations. Teams were extracting objects from those sites. Some locations were accessible through natural ice caves. Others required drilling. And what they found wasn't just ruins. Some of the recovered objects still worked. Linda pushed for documentation. The officer provided coordinates and partially redacted internal documents, project names, location codes, operation designations that corresponded to the exact sites witnesses had been describing for years. For the first time, the puzzle had edges. After learning about the structures, Linda's next big question was simple. How do you actually get down there? The answer came in the form of a military contractor who had participated in a classified drilling operation in 2003. His briefing, like so many others, was vague. They told him they were accessing a geological anomaly. He was given his role, given his equipment, and told not to ask questions above his clearance level. He descended into the shaft. The walls around him shifted from white to a deep, crystalline blue as he went deeper, long frozen striations catching the beam of his headlamp like the pages of a book. The circle of light from the surface above him shrank. Then it disappeared entirely. And then the ice stopped. Not gradually, suddenly. He stepped off the platform into a space that was large and open and absolutely definitively not natural. The walls had markings on them, symbols arranged in patterns that didn't match any writing system he'd ever seen, or that anyone on the team could identify. The air felt different. The silence felt different. Ahead of him, set into one of the walls, was a doorway, an actual doorway, leading somewhere deeper inside. He didn't go through it. His clearance didn't allow it. He watched as scientists and higher-ranking military personnel prepared to enter. Then his mission ended, and he was pulled out. Before the conversation with Linda concluded, he said something that has stayed with her ever since. People should know we found something down there that changes history. By this point in her investigation, Linda had stopped being surprised by individual accounts. What surprised her now was the consistency and the specificity of details that no random fabrication could have manufactured. A satellite imagery analyst told her he had seen the raw Antarctic images before they were processed for public release. Entire sections, he said, had been deliberately blurred or removed. Someone was scrubbing the data before it could be seen. A materials scientist who had briefly worked with samples from Antarctic recovery operations said the materials defied categorization. They didn't match anything in any existing database. Not any alloy, not any naturally occurring mineral combination, not anything on record. A logistics coordinator working with the National Science Foundation described equipment requisitions that made no sense for a scientific mission. Heavy excavation tools, sealed transport containers, supply lines connected directly to the Department of Defense. These weren't the supply lists of researchers studying penguins and glaciers. Multiple witnesses independently mentioned one more detail. Electronic equipment would malfunction near certain locations in Antarctica. Compasses behaved erratically. Communications went down. Instruments gave impossible readings. Whatever was down there, whatever had been down there for 12,000 years, wasn't entirely passive. By 2020, Linda Moulton Howe had collected more than 15 verified testimonies. She had cross-referenced coordinates. She had matched operational details across accounts from people who had never spoken to each other. The picture was enormous and, to her, undeniable. But something else was happening at the same time. The witnesses were dying. One by one, the people who had trusted her with their stories were passing away. Some of old age, some unexpectedly. Each death was a chapter closing. Each one reminded her of the responsibility she carried. And then, in 2022, the retired NORAD officer died. Linda described that moment as the turning point. She realized she was now the last person holding all of these accounts together, the last link in a chain that stretched back 25 years. If she waited much longer, the story wouldn't just go untold, it would disappear. In a 2023 interview, she was direct about it. I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survive. In late 2023, she began compiling what she called a comprehensive Antarctic report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, every piece of evidence from a quarter-century of careful, patient investigation. In early 2024, she began releasing sections through her platform, Earth Files. She published coordinates. She released declassified Operation High Jump documents, including the redacted sections. She presented the evidence openly and said, "Check this yourself. Don't take my word for it. Look." And the response from governments around the world? Silence. No denials. No confirmations. No explanations. Just the same silence that has always surrounded this subject. Here's what I keep coming back to. Linda Moulton Howe is not a conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel and a ring light. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist with decades of verified reporting. The people she interviewed weren't attention seekers. They were people who spent years, sometimes decades, keeping their silence and only spoke because they felt they were running out of time. You can believe every word of what they described. You can think it's an elaborate misunderstanding. You can land somewhere in the middle. But what you can't easily dismiss is this. Multiple independent witnesses from different countries, different branches of service, and different time periods, all described the same thing beneath the ice of Antarctica. Something ancient, something massive, something that was built before the last ice age, by a civilization we have no record of. Antarctica has always been a place of extremes: extreme cold, extreme isolation, extreme silence. Maybe the silence itself is the most telling thing of all. If you found this story as gripping as I did, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are curious about the unexplained. And if you're new here, subscribe. We cover the stories that don't always make the front page, but probably should. Until next time.